Hello and welcome. So you're a big bus company like London Transport and you're used to taking buses in vast numbers, but the buses that you normally take are starting to come to the end of their production. So what do? Well, you organise a trial with new buses to see which one fits the bill and cuts the mustard. And this is exactly what London Transport did in the 1980s. When the end of production was looming for the Leyland Titan and also the Mark I Metrobus. Come with me on a YouTube time machine as we head back to 1984 and 1985 to visit the London Transport AVE trials. In 1977, London Transport was looking for a new bus to replace not only the poorly performing DMS Daimler Fleetlines, but also the Swifts and the Merlins, which it hated pretty much almost as much as the Fleetlines, to be fair. That bus, of course, would be the MCW Metrobus, to which you're now saying, Jake, are you out of your mind? It wasn't the Metrobus, it was the Leyland Titan. And yes, to some extent, you'd be right about the Titan, not that I'm out of my mind. But as we know, and we've commented several times on this channel, production problems at British Leyland meant that the Titan was a little bit sketchy and hiccupy with its production. And this led to all sorts of other operators cancelling their orders for Leyland's new double-decker, leaving pretty much only a handful of operators to operate the new Leyland Titan. That, of course, being London Transport, who was the largest operator of the type, Reading Transport, Greater Manchester, and, of course, West Midlands Travel. And there was one built for China Motorbus as well as a few demonstrators too. But all these delays in deliveries opened the door for MCW and the Metrobus. London Transport would go on to operate over 1,400 Metrobuses, which they'd bought from brand new. On top of that, they would also go on to acquire second-hand Metrobuses too. However, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, so let's go back to the early 1980s. In 1982, MCW had launched the Mark II Metrobus, and this was meant to be cheaper to manufacture as it had 60% less components than the Mark I Metrobus. The design also simplified the body panels, the roof panels, and the fixings for the bodywork as well. And although you could tell it was still a Metrobus, the front end had been totally facelifted. Such was the clout of the buying of the big fleets that certain fleets could dictate what they wanted and what they didn't want. And this would see not only London Transport, but also Greater Manchester PTE continue to order the Mark I Metrobuses. Now, I'm assuming that this was done for standardisation reasons rather than anything else. Now, the Mark II Metrobus wasn't the only new kid in town. Now, as I mentioned earlier, London Transport had pinned their hopes on the Leyland Titan being the next big bus and success in their fleet. And clearly this wasn't going to happen. In 1979, Leyland had come out with the B45 project, and this had later morphed into the Leyland Olympian, which was a low-cost, more flexible version of the Leyland Titan. Where the Titan had been a fully integral bus, the Olympian had a chassis and could be bodied by other bodybuilders, and had more in common with the Daimler Fleetline, the Bristol VR, and potentially the Leyland Olympian, in that operators could order their bus and order their own specification bodywork to their own requirements. The Olympian shared the running gear from the Leyland Titan, so the project for the Leyland Titan hadn't been completely in vain. The next type of buses in the trials was certainly not new models by any stretch of the imagination. In 1977, Dennis of Guildford launched the Dominator, which had been its first double-decker chassis to be built since the last of the low lines, which was a licence-built Bristol low-decker, had been produced in 1967. Again, this bus was built as a chassis and could have any bodywork or any combination of bodywork fitted that you so required. In fact, the Dennis Dominator could be customised with all sorts of different options, from axles to engines to gearboxes. That same year, 1977, Volvo would launch their Mark II Volvo Ailsa front-engined double-decker bus, and this would be replaced in 1980 by the Mark II Ailsa. And it's fair to say that this was a model that was outside the usual standard of thinking when it came to double-decker buses, with the engine, of course, being at the front. These used a slightly smaller Volvo TD70H turbocharged diesel engine, which allowed room for a cab for the driver, which, to be fair, when you're designing a bus, is a little bit of a necessity, isn't it, really? As well as a fairly roomy front platform. Now, in addition to new vehicles, there was also new technologies floating around as well. Now, for many years, London Transport had been looking at a successor to the Routemaster. Well, to be fair, not just a successor, but an updated version of the Routemaster, something that they could call reliable and something that they could call their own. London Transport was convinced that the only buses that could operate successfully in London were indeed Routemasters, and this would lead to the XRM project, and this, to be fair, is worthy of a video in its own right. So if you'd like to see a video on the XRM project from London Transport, please comment down below, because it's quite interesting and it goes in all sorts of weird directions. So I'm not going to say too much about it in this particular video, but again, if you'd like to see that, just comment down below. One of the things that London Transport had taken an interest in with the XRM project was the hydrostatic transmission. The hydrostatic transmission, or the hydrostatic drive, uses piped hydraulic oil to turn the wheels, and this is done with traction motors in the hubs. Now, this is quite a clever little system because it gets rid of things like the conventional propeller shaft and allows the designer pretty much complete freedom where they want to put the engine on the vehicle. Indeed, in 1976, a Daimler Fleetline was fitted with hydrostatic drive. Now, the XRM idea was eventually shelved in 1981, and the hydrostatic drive idea as well was abandoned because of the huge engineering difficulties with it. But things such as this were obviously still catching LRT's eyes, or will be revealed shortly. So there you go, you can see that all this new technology and all these untried, to London Transport at least, vehicle types, which were now available, needed really looking into, especially as Leyland were looking at getting rid of the Leyland Titan, with London Transport now being the only customer for it, and likewise with MCW trying to wean LT onto the Mark II Metrobuses. By 1984, LT had decided to conduct some tests to see which vehicles would be the best ones that would fit their requirements. These tests would be known as the Alternative Vehicle Evaluation Trials, or the AVE trials for short. These trials would pit these newcomer vehicles against each other and would consist of Mark II Metrobuses, Leyland Olympians, Dennis Dominators and Volvo Ailsas. These trials would also help avoid the situation that London Transport got into with the DMS Fleetlines as well, as of course they were rather anxious to avoid a repeat of that saga happening all over again. The route chosen for these trials was the 170, which ran Monday to Saturdays, and on Sundays they would be put onto the 44 service. The 170 operated from Clapham Junction to Roehampton via Wandsworth and Putney Heath, whilst the 44 operated between Tooting Station and Vauxhall Station via Tooting Broadway, Wandsworth and Battersea. Both these routes operated from Stockwell. The 170 route had been DMS operated since 1971, and these DMSs would operate alongside these AVE vehicles as a benchmark to see how they performed. Some would say it wasn't a particularly high benchmark. The first buses to turn up for the trials were the 3 Leyland Olympians. These featured Eastern Coachworks bodywork and were given the codes by London Transport of L1 to L3. Now, I have done a video on the London Leyland Olympians, and if you'd like to watch that, I'll try and remember to put a little link to that in the top right hand corner. L1 to 3 looked a little bit like standard Leyland Olympians, which at that time were entering service around the country. But they also resembled the Leyland Titans as well, that were also just entering service within the London transport fleet. L1 would receive the registration A101 SYE and was fitted with a TL11 engine and a hydrocyclic gearbox. This was delivered in February 1984 to Chiswick. L2 was given the registration A102 SYE, and this was fitted with a Gardner 6LXB engine and a Voith gearbox, and this was delivered to Aldenham in February 1984. L3 was of course registered A103 SYE and was another bus fitted with a Gardner 6LXB engine and a Voith gearbox, and again this was delivered in February 1984 to Chiswick. The buses entered service between March and April in 1984 at Stockwell. The other buses involved in the trials were V1, V2 and V3, and these would be Volvo Ailsa B55 Mark IIIs. All three of them would be fitted with Alexander bodywork. V1 and V2 being rather conventional, well, compared with V3 anyway. V1 was given the registration A101 SUU, while V2 was given the registration of A102 SUU. Both of them entered service at Stockwell in April 1984. Again, from Monday to Saturday, these would be working on the 170 service, but on Sundays they would work the 44 service. Both V1 and V2 had 47 seats upstairs and 31 seats downstairs with dual doors in the conventional place. In June 1984, V3, which was registered A103 SUU, was delivered to Chiswick, and this had the seating capacity of 36 upstairs and 28 downstairs. Again, this was fitted with dual doors, but not to the usual layout for a London bus. Normally, London buses have a door at the front, the entrance door by the driver, and the exit door in between the front wheels and the rear wheels. However, V3's second set of doors was located behind the rear axle. This bus also had two staircases, one behind the driver in the conventional place and one behind the rear wheels. This made the rear platform something very akin to a modern Routemaster. The idea of this layout was to see if it actually helped the free flow of passengers at bus stops, this being to help solve the problem of long dwell times at bus stops. But unfortunately, the twin staircases created a bit of a blind spot for the bus driver. In those days before there was CCTV, the driver couldn't see the rear platform and the area opposite the rear set of doors. This resulted in a conductor having to be carried on the bus at all times. V3 wouldn't get into service until March 1985, and that was 11 months after V1 and V2 had entered service. Obviously, being basically a crew bus, it couldn't really work the 170 as that was an OPO route, so it was initially put on the 77A, which was Aldwych to Wandsworth via Trafalgar Square, Westminster, Vauxhall and Clapham Junction. Although later it would be transferred onto the 88, which ran between Oxford Circus and Clapham Common, calling at Piccadilly Circus, Trafalgar Square, Westminster, Vauxhall and Stockwell. In July 1984, two Mark II Metrobuses arrived, these being M1441 and M1442. Now apparently there was meant to be another Metrobus arrive as well, but that never materialised. M1441 would be registered A441 UUV, whilst M1442 would be registered A442 UUV. 1441 was fitted with a Gardner 6LXB engine, whilst 1442 had a Cummins L10 engine. Now, as I said, they both arrived in June 1984 and didn't enter service in Stockwell until August 1984. In November 1984, three Dennis Dominators arrived. London buses coded these as H1 to 3, H for Hester Dennis, Dennis being part of the Hester group. These buses were bodied by Northern Counties to a very Manchester-esque design. and they seated 70 passengers with 43 upstairs and 27 downstairs. They also had dual doors. H1 was registered B101WUW and featured a Maxwell gearbox. H2 was registered B102WUW and this featured a Voith gearbox. H3 would receive the registration number of B103WUW and again this was powered through a Voith gearbox. These Dominators entered service at Stockwell on the 170 in February 1985. Now there was another special bus that was involved in these trials. This bus would be DMS 2456. This had started out in June 1977 as a standard B20 DMS Fleetline with the registration OJD 456R. In October 1984 it was moved to Chiswick Experimental Workshop and it was rebuilt to the Ogle design specification, which featured a split step entrance, forward straight staircase, green handrails and a repositioned centre doorway with extra shallow steps. During this time the cab was also rebuilt with ergonomically designed controls. Now unfortunately when they rebuilt the cab they didn't leave room for a ticket machine, which meant the bus could only be operated as a crew bus. This DMS entered service at Stockwell on the 77 route, which was a crew route, in August 1985. Now there was one other bus which was a little bit late to the party, and it's one that you tend not to really hear a huge amount about, and this is C1, the Volvo Cumulo Bus. Now I think I've said that right. If I have mispronounced that, I do apologise. This was given the registration C101CUL, and from a distance it looked remarkably similar to the Volvo Ailsas, the V-Class. It was given Alexander bodywork and had the large Volvo grille across the front. However, that's really where the similarities ended. For this was a Volvo Citybus rather than a front-engined Ailsa, the Citybus having the engine underneath the floor. Now, London Transport, or rather London Buses as they'd become then, leased this vehicle from Volvo. And while it had a standard underfloor engine, it was also fitted with a hydraulic pump, a motor and an energy accumulator, this being a Volvo Fleig motor Cumulo. Now again, I hope I've said that correctly, but this was where the bus got its name from. This accumulator was fitted between the gearbox and the differential, and as the bus was slowing down to stop, the accumulator collected the kinetic energy and released it during acceleration, which helped reduce the engine load. Well, that was the theory anyway. It was delivered to Chiswick in August 1985, but didn't enter service until July 1986 at Palmer's Green on Service 102. Now, as we all know, London Transport went on to buy a sizable fleet, 263 to be exact, of Eastern Coachworks bodied Leyland Olympians. So you might think that that was the result of the tests that the Olympian was the best bus. Incidentally, the Olympians that were ordered, the main batch ones, featured the same interior as had been fitted to DMS 2456, so that played a huge part in the tests as well. Many more Leyland and indeed Volvo Olympians would go on to serve London in various capacities with various operators over the next decade or two. But that wasn't quite it. In the mid-1980s, London Buses was looking for some quality second-hand vehicles to help improve the age of the vehicles it was operating in Hertfordshire. This would see London Buses buying 13 Volvo Ailsas from South Yorkshire, these being fitted with the rather striking Van Hall McArdle bodywork. These buses would enter service at Potter's Bar from March 1987. Now, you can't help but think that the Volvo B55 Ailsa was the bus that London Transport would have really wanted, especially by buying up all these second-hand examples. However, by the time the Ailsa had come to the attention of London Buses, the production of the bus had actually stopped, the last ones being built in 1985. So London Buses was forced to buy these second-hand examples. They would also be joined by V1, V2 and V3, the trial buses. V3 having been rebuilt in July 1986 to just one door, the front door obviously. However, it retained its two staircases. These buses would operate such routes as the 84, the 234, the 242, the 263, the 310A and the W8. Shortly after this, 50 more second-hand Ailsas would follow from West Midlands Travel. These had been new to West Midlands PTE in 1976 and had been used at Oldbury and Sutton Coldfield. The former West Midlands buses were divided between Potter's Bar Garage and Harrow Weald buses, the latter Harrow Weald being home to Harrow buses, which was one of the low-cost units that had been set up by London Buses in a bid to win tendered work. Now, the second-hand Volvo Ailsas didn't have a particularly long life in London, and by 1990 most of them had been withdrawn and sold. So what happened to the trials buses then? Well, V1 and V2 managed to stay in London until 1995, both working for London Suburban Buses at Edmonton. Unfortunately, in 1992, V3 was involved in a rather nasty accident with a tree which distorted the body frame and caused a huge amount of damage to the vehicle. By November 1992, it had been sold to PVS of Carlton. However, that same month, it was bought by Black Prince of Morley in Leeds. Now, fortunately, V3 has been fully restored to its two-door condition and is now happily a preserved bus, as is for that matter V1 and V2, although V2 seems to have slipped off the radar a little bit over the last few years. Both were initially transferred through to MTL in Liverpool, before joining V3 at Black Prince in Leeds. The three Dennis Dominators, H1, H2 and H3, found themselves being shipped off to Merton for storage when the trials finished in 1986. 87 would see the three of them transferred through to Brixton, where they worked the 137 service. From 1990 they would also work on the 159 on Sundays. In October 1991, the three buses would pass to London Coaches at Wandsworth. H2 and H3 were painted in the London Pride white and red sightseeing livery, but unfortunately H1 was withdrawn in December 1992. August 1993 would see H2 and H3 withdrawn as well, but these were sold to Capital Citybus, which then entered into the conglomerate that is First Group. This would see them eventually being transferred through to Leicester and Northampton. H3 was sold to PVS at Carlton for scrap in November 2002, whilst H2 shuffled off for scrap in June 2003. Now, I think it's safe to say that the Dennis Dominator wasn't the huge success in London that the Olympian was, with only London Pride Sightseeing and Capital Citybus running them in any substantial number. Capital Citybus not only running brand new examples but also second-hand ones as well, including buses from Southampton, Mainline, Kelvin, Leicester, and of course, as I mentioned previously, H1 and H2 from London Coaches. The two Mark II Metrobuses, M1441 and 1442, would remain at Stockwell throughout the duration of the AVE trials. 1441 would move on to Streatham and then transfer across to Croydon, where it would be used on the 68A. In complete contrast, 1442 would remain at Stockwell, where it would remain on the 170 and the 44. Now, the garages these buses were in would pass into the ownership of South London along with the two Metrobuses. In May 2000, 1442 was transferred to Croydon, where it was withdrawn. It would later be scrapped at Croydon by PVS. Fortunately, 1441 was to tread a different path. In 1999, it would pass into the ownership of Arriva, South London, and be transferred to Croydon and then on to Brixton, where it would receive the red Cowie horn livery. By February 2001, it had been withdrawn, following spells with Watson of West Norwood, Skylark Travel of Dartford, It went on loan to Enzyme Bus, who painted it in their livery. It was used in Cambridge by Enzyme's subsidiary Cambridge Blue, but returned to Enzyme Bus as spare by 2007. 2008 would see it roaming again as it headed to Bath to be used on city sightseeing, but by 2010 it had been acquired for preservation. The Mark II Metrobus would go on to operate in London, but in nothing like the substantial numbers of the Mark I. London Buses would go on to purchase a very small batch of second-hand Mark II Metrobuses from Yorkshire Ryder for use at Potter's Bar. London Buses also leased 29 Mark II Metrobuses for Harrow Buses in 1987. These operated from Harrow Wheel Depot on routes 114 and 140, and they didn't last overly long, just 3 years, until January 1991, when they were returned to the leaser. The AVE trial Olympians L1, L2 and L3 stayed at Stockwell until August 1986, and then they moved over to Norwood to join some production buses over there. After a spell at Croydon, they were sold to Connex Bus in 2000. L1 would go on to be owned by Green Light Travel, who would lend it out to Southern Transit in Brighton. In June 2009, L2 would be rescued for preservation by the Bromley Bus Preservation Group. After a spell on loan to Griffin Bus of Longfield for a couple of years, she returned back into preservation. L3 had a similar fate, again being bought by the founders of the Bromley Bus Preservation in June 2009. Again, she was loaned to Griffin Bus of Longfield. But sadly, the engine blew up while she was under loan to Griffin Bus. She's now back in preservation again. And Stu Boxall of the Bromley Bus Preservation Group is now also the owner of DMS 2456, after it was rescued by Gordon Lamming in October 1991. And lastly, you'll be wondering what happened to C1, the Cumulo Bus. September 1987, it would go into store at Palmer's Green, where it would be returned to Volvo. The Cumulo drive would be replaced by a conventional ZF gearbox. In 1988, it was bought by McMenemy of A1 service in Ardrossan in Scotland. However, it would also later see service with Black Prince in Leeds. Black Prince seeming to be a bit of a repository for the weird and wonderful buses that London Transport and other operators operated over the years. Maybe they're worth a video in their own right. I think they might be a good idea. What do you think? Comment down below. Now, I'm not overly sure if C1 survives. It was last bought by somebody in Hull in 2007. So if you know if it's still around, please comment. Again, let me know down below. I'd be interested to know. Well, look, we've reached the end so far, and I'm sorry it's proved to be a little bit of a saga to do this. I thought this would be a short video, but unfortunately, it's not, is it? It must be getting on for about half an hour now. I do hope you're all awake. And more importantly, I hope you enjoyed this look at the AVE trials of London Transport and London Buses. Now, despite the length of this video, please remember that this is just a brief look at this part of history, at these trials. And there may well be bits that I've left out or omitted. And if it's something that's important to you, please comment down below and let me know. And I do apologise if I have left anything out that is important. If you did enjoy this video, please like, hype and share it. It's free to like and it's free to hype, and it gets the video noticed a little bit more by YouTube, which is a good thing, as that helps the channel grow. If you like what I do and you're enjoying the channel, you can also offer super thanks and buy me a hot chocolate. I would be very grateful, and I do like a nice hot chocolate, especially in these colder autumn days. And lastly, I am going to stop soon, I promise. Lastly, if you can subscribe to the channel, because again, that not only means that you receive notifications of when I make future releases, but also it helps the channel grow because YouTube noticed the subscribers have gone up. And that's a good thing, isn't it? And I'd like to quickly take this opportunity of welcoming all the new subscribers to the channel. We seem to get loads every week coming on and joining us. So welcome to the channel. Have a look through my old videos to see if there's anything there that appeals to you. Don't be afraid to drop a hello or a comment in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you next time on possibly a slightly shorter video. Who knows? Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now.